Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, if you're getting the feedback. This is Future Governments and Cities, what roads to smart sustainability, accessibility, and inclusive society will look like. And I'm really proud to be joined by amazing leaders from all over the world. And so we're going to get into the content pretty quick, but I want to make sure that the panelists have time to introduce themselves. You can find their bio on, on the agenda. It's available. But my name is Debra Rue. I'm joining from Virginia in the United States, and I'm the CEO and founder of Rue Global Impact. And we focus on making sure that everybody can be included. Very important that everybody be included, and tech for all. So very excited about the conversation. So let me go next to Maya.
Hi, I'm Maya Zuckerman. I'm from San Francisco. I am the COO of Lumen. We're a strategy firm, but I also work with the Global New Mobility Coalition, which is a side project of the World Economic Forum around mobility, inclusion, micromobility, and how do we create smarter cities. And I'm also doing my MBA around circular economies, and I've been advocating for regenerative and circular economies for a few years. And my last little thing is I'm also the co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee, part of the IEEE Ethical Aligned Design. We look at how do we move standards of AI and AS into reality, into actually how we actually code and create technology in the world. So excited to be here.
She's also a science fiction writer, which I thought was super cool. So welcome, Maya. Yuri, let's start with you. Let's go with you next.
Fantastic. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How is everyone doing? I'm Uri. I'm originally from Mexico, but I also have a Danish passport because I lived many years in different countries, among them Denmark. I had a lot of experience in the financial world with over 10 years, and also in the digital marketing over 15 years. But I decided to come back to Mexico 5 years ago to found Grupo BienAhora. We're the largest wellness event and leading wellness organization in Latin America, Mexico. And that's what we're doing at the moment. I've been here for 5 years now. I'm really happy to share today with you.
Welcome, Yuri. We're excited to have you here. Richard, you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Richard Streitz, and I'm the COO of Rue Global Impact. I work very closely, obviously, with Debra Rue on a daily basis. She already spoke about our firm. I'll give you a little bit about my background. I come from the film and industry and entertainment industry, actually, to the accessibility and inclusion space. I was a Walt Disney Imagineer for many years, building immersive and large-scale environments, both large and small. And accessibility and inclusion was absolutely hypercritical in the development of those. And that is what really has provided a great deal of awareness. And after I left Disney, I got into this profession to date. And so that's how and where my background is and where I come from when speaking about smart cities, having built many around the world and having lived also, like Yuri, in different countries. And I'm in Richmond, Virginia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. And certainly last but not least, Marco, you have the floor. And Marco, you win the prize of not being muted first. Congratulations. I thought for sure I was going to win that one, but.
So we are the first country to have the Pfizer vaccine. Hooray. Well, apart from that, I am the founder of FreedomX, which is basically an Amazon for the socially excluded. I used to be homeless. I have my own TV show called Get a House for Free on Primetime TV in the UK, where I give homes to homeless families. And that led to the rise of FreedomX, where we're able to build a technology using blockchain and AI to feel the transparencies. They can actually see who you're giving the money to, and there's total inclusion, which is an amazing thing. I'm also a #1 best-selling author of 3 books now, and I am a filmmaker. So I'm from a similar industry from Richard, but I'm very new to the industry. But I've made a couple of films that have made a lot of difference in terms of social revolution. And I also just released a Hollywood film called Legacy of Lies with myself and Scott Adkins starring in it. It's a spy thriller. And we've just won our 24th Best Film Award.
Congratulations. That's amazing, Marco. And of course it is Sir Marco Robinson, which, in the States we think is cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to do round robins, and I'm going to ask questions one at a time, and we're going to go all the way through, and certainly happy to try to address any questions that come up from the participants as well. So Yuri, we're going to start with you. What are the biggest challenges that developing countries will face in the future when it comes to building an accessible and inclusive society?
Okay, well, I think first we need to define what we mean by future. So let's say 30 years from now. In that case, it would be 2015. And the biggest challenges that we will face in developing countries, I think it will be, first of all, something that probably everyone has been talking about already. Well, it's an aging population that's going to be less able to use and access technology. And even though artificial intelligence make it easier for all the elders, I say because you will be 68 years old. So we will need guidance not to feel lost and support not to feel lonely. There will be less young people to care for us, since most countries will have an inverted population pyramid. A second big challenge will be a sharper economic and social contrast between big groups, and there will be a lot of groups of people left with little or no access to healthcare and technology. The third one, I would say it's a further conglomeration of urban areas. So leaving less developed regions in the countryside without focus, without development. However, COVID has pushed people to move away from the big cities. So that is an interesting trend that we could build on. I think that the pandemic has had an interesting impact, and it's already tested some of these challenges.
Excellent points. I also think it's very interesting that I know that we keep saying that developing countries can learn so much from developed countries, and I actually think in the future we're going to learn. I think that's going to reverse. So very interesting points. Maya, I know that hopefully your technology. I know that you froze, but glad that you're back. We can hear you and we can see you too.
Okay,
so let me ask you the next question. How can we build smart communities that tap into our innovations, and at the same time, why do a lot of innovation projects fail? I know you're an expert in that particular point.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with the second part of the question is why do innovations fail? And one of the interesting things that we've noticed also our work with Lumen is that, and then there's even a word here now in San Francisco in the Bay Area, there's a lot of innovation theater, but then there's a lack of implementation, because implementation is really hard. It takes a lot of work, and innovation is fun and exciting. And the money's there, the investment is there, but then when you actually get to innovation, that's a full contact sport, and that's where our humanity shows up. That's where a lot of the issues with actually human behavior show up. How do we actually do work together to actually implement it? And also, who gets to innovate, I think is also a conversation. When we're not including everybody in that conversation, then we're innovating only for the innovators. And so I think that's part of what I'm seeing and have lived here in San Francisco for 17 years. And I think that's for every level, I think from the app level to the city level. And the change takes longer and it's not as easy. And to tap into communities, I think a lot of more of the modern cities have been built around cars and have not been built around humans. So it's actually transitioning into how do we actually build around humanity? And with COVID, like one of the biggest movements that we've been tracking, especially with the Global New Mobility Coalition, is a concept of the 15-minute city, the open streets. All these conversations have actually led to deeper inquiry into, well, when we open the streets, are we inviting the communities to be part of that conversation? When we open streets, does done in an equitable way. I mean, there are communities when you just say, oh, let's just open the streets for everybody, but we're not considering safety and mobility and how people move around that area. So if we don't actually include cities into this conversation, communities into the conversation, who actually lives there, we're creating more issues than actually solving them. I mean, I live in San Francisco, and we have a very visible encampment issue, which is heartbreaking, because you have people living on the street outside my house, and there's no way for us to even interact. There's no healthy way of, how do I help the person without saying, well, this is okay to just build camps everywhere on the sidewalks and then I can't walk. There's all these issues that are happening. And if we actually have a conversation, and I would love to help people, but I don't know how. And it's very hard, because we're not communicating as a community. We're separating ourselves into sectors. I'm in the tech sector, somebody else is in this sector, and this is not a healthy community. This is sectors and silos. So I think actually engaging more with people and bringing in their genius, because we can bring solutions together, is part of how we move from the, as I said, innovation theater into the full context sport of implementation and change.
Well said, and I agree. I think we continue to not have all of the stakeholders at the table. I know that we're really working hard on changing that, but still we're not seeing it happen. So it's, women are a perfect example of people that aren't being meaningfully included. And then you go into the other diversity groups, including the ones that I really care about, people with disabilities and people that, are aging and often into disabilities as well. I think we have a lot of opportunities. And I know that when Marco speaks, he might want to talk a little bit about the homeless comments that you made as well, because I know that's something that's important to him. But let me go to Richard now. Richard, why is it so important for society to build inclusive design into a smart cities and IoT networks for people with disabilities in the aging communities? Richard, you now win the second place prize of speaking with your mute button.
Of course, of course. Thank you for the question. As smart cities are certainly being realized and created globally, smart devices and their integration into the technical ecosystems is what's absolutely critical and becoming more and more essential. As the development of these devices have become so advanced, especially over the more recent years, it has become important to integrate them into the environments as they're being created. Certainly, and in doing that, realizing that there's both sort of the micro and macro view of the development of these, and why that's important for the elderly and the person with disability community. Micro being, of course, those devices and engagements that are important to the small physical environment around the individual as they're engaging with the environment. And then the macro, them engaging actually with the larger ecosystems that exist in the larger environments, whether it be their house or the community and city and so forth. This all becomes really important to, this integration becomes really important to allow them to be able to engage in society. This is what allows them to be able to navigate freely within the community, to be able to go to work and to work in the working environments. Again, going back to that micro, to shop and to play. What's important about that is it allows the individuals to establish a sense of feeling and a feeling of belonging in the community. And that's what should be the end game for all of this. Is important for the individuals to feel that they are active and contributing members into society that is being created by these smart cities. So as Maya, I think you said, the trick is the devil is in the details in regard to actually executing that. The philosophy is good. I think it's important that we understand the nature of having the dialogue and making sure the stakeholders, which has already been said, incorporated into the design and development process, so that there is a true integration with those individuals being able to work within the environment. So I think those are some of the some of the more critical aspects as to why it's important that when we design and think of these environments, why it's important that inclusive design is considered essential for the aging communities as well as the persons with disabilities communities.
Great points, Richard. And I think sometimes designers can be very, very clever, very, very smart people. And I think sometimes they think, we don't really need to include the communities because we got this. We understand what people that are aging needs, and we know what your needs are if you're, a person that doesn't speak the native language. But I think that continues to be a mistake. We actually have to be very deliberate about including people. Representation matters, considering all the intersectionalities of these conversations too. So great points. Marco, let me turn it over to you. How can we bring together the different stakeholders to assure we're building smart, sustainable, accessible, and inclusive societies? Marco, you are on mute. Marco.
Causality of this. Can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you.
Okay, it's a great question. It's a big question. And I believe to really conquer this, we have to go to the causality of this problem. There are now 1.6 billion people homeless. There are double that are sleeping on people's couches. And of course, because they don't have an economy of their own to be able to succeed in today's world. This is the problem, which is the cause of a disconnected society, because people are operating on a survival basis rather than a thriving basis. So what you've got now is a situation where people don't really have the time, but more so, they don't have the inclination to help someone else less fortunate because they are so suffering themselves, so to speak. And the greatest action we can take as humans is when something is good for us, good for the person we're helping, and also good for the greater good. The question is, how do you connect all that? And the other issue is government. The governments of the cities in the world, of the major cities in the world, are mostly corrupt. We have to face the facts here. We can take a very good example of the pandemic and the recent award of government contracts to government people that were connected to the government without an independent, I forget the word now, but subcontracting basis. So everything is basically skew-whiffed. The distribution of wealth is completely unbalanced. And the only way we're going to address that is by going to the cause of the situation. Now, technology, I believe, is pretty much one of the only ways we can do that as a society, because it includes disabilities, it includes non-binaries, it includes everybody, without having to have that problem with being scared or feeling unsafe in San Francisco when you're trying to help someone on the street, whether they've got COVID or whether you don't know who they are, they might want to rob you, okay? So I believe that in technology, we should have an application where everybody that is excluded and included is verified on where they are in society, where they want to go and where they've been. And also when you have that transparency, we can go outside and we can actually verify people with this app, and we can say, right, these people need our help, and it would be great if I could help them. Now, the other facts that I will also mention on this message, on this question is that charities are not answering the problem. And the reason that charities are not answering the problem is because 96% of charities of money that goes into a charity from donations is lost in the organization in internal costs. Now, we can identify those as corruption or other things, but basically it's not getting to the people that really need it. And I'll give you another example of that. British government aid sent £17.6 million to the South African president about 10 years ago, and he used the money to build a new mansion. So, this is what the problem is. There's no transparency in the blockchain or the supply chain of where that money goes. And as a donator to charity, if I'm giving to charity, I want to know where my money's going, but more importantly, is it making a difference? Now, individuals want to be included because actually everybody is a genius. Everybody's a genius, but we are conditioned in society not to be a genius. We are conditioned to be enslaved to an employer, to a government, and be in a system which does not serve most of the people. So we've got to be empowered, and of course the key to that is education. So on this application, there has to be a way that we can educate everybody to get them on the same page as everybody else, so they can have access to the same tools and resources that everybody else in the elite bracket has, that they are not able to access right now. Because the reason people are in poverty really is because of their education and access to those tools. Now, I know this because I used to be homeless for many years. I slept in the car, I slept in the car park, I slept in the park. You know, my mum was sexually abused, physically abused. And in those days, we had less access to those kind of things because it was shunned upon to even tell the rest of the family what was going on. Now, I think we've moved on a great deal where we can actually share these things, especially with women, and with feminism movement now is a huge movement now. With the Me Too movement is a huge movement now. Black Lives Matter is a huge movement now. And these divisive, although they appear divisive right now, they're becoming more inclusive as people become more educated and aware of them. So these are my thoughts, and I'm working on that right now because I think it's the biggest problem in the world we really do have. There are people dying right now that we don't even see, that we can't even help, because the money that is to help them is not getting to them, and they're not getting the education, the resources they need. And the first thing people need is food, water, and shelter. And these basic needs are not being met. And when that's not being met, no one can succeed in society. Simple.
I thought I was talking to somebody at the United Nations about some of these problems, and I thought it was very interesting that something that they said to me was that whenever people are in refugee situations, and first of all, it's really frightening because the average stay in a refugee camp is now 20 years. And so they're asking for food, shelter, but they're also asking for Wi-Fi, because people understand that if we can get access to technology and connectivity and Wi-Fi, we can actually try to take care of ourselves. So it's just, I just wanted to add that to your amazing comments as well, Marco. So let's talk about this from the lens of technology a little bit, because of course, technology, as we humanize it, make it work for solving some of the largest problems that we have as human beings, including taking care of our precious planet. Technology is very, very important in these conversations. So Yuri, I'm going to start with you again. How can technology and artificial intelligence cope with some of these inclusion challenges that we've been speaking about?
Well, that's a very interesting comment by Marco, by everyone. And it's a big challenge because as I mentioned before, we're going to have an aging population. We have an aging population, so technology is the only way forward. But we also need to think how to distribute better the human capital, intellectual capital. So with the pandemic, we were forced to accelerate the use of internet by the elderly. And in many countries, governments offered computers or tablets for children. Unfortunately, that was not the case in Mexico. However, even when the elderly were forced to adopt the use of internet and apps, they felt very lost. They felt quite lost, even with apps that might seem as simple as Facebook. We experienced that as an organization because we launched our event, our wellness event, for free in Spanish in all the Latin world. And we found that for the first time, many elderly people joined because they were isolated. However, they had a lot of challenges just to open a video on Facebook. So while we can work on getting artificial intelligence to cope with inclusion challenges, we need to constantly create simple educational programs for the elderly and create supporting groups one-to-many so that they won't feel lonely or lost. As I mentioned, some governments were able to provide free tablets, internet educational programs with incentives for people with less resources. So that's something that has to be more available for all the countries. And finally, I think we should incentivize the distribution, as I was mentioning, of non-artificial intelligence, intellectual capital to the different regions to enforce the human aspect. That is another trend that we saw with the pandemic. We had a better distribution of brain power moving towards the countryside. So that's something that I think governments should incentivize so that we can distribute better people and support the groups with less access to all these tools.
Great points, Yuri, and I think it's just such an important point that you made. You made so many important points, but that the governments really need to be paying attention to what's happening, you know, as people's, are moving to the countryside more. We're seeing that happening in the States as well. And so let's pay attention to what's happening and what people are saying and what society is saying. So excellent, excellent points. Richard, I'm going to go to you next. Why is it critical for there to be follow through and or checkpoints during smart city design and production to ensure that we actually have sustainable and accessible projects when it's completed and inclusive?
Well, thank you. Great question. Having the proper checkpoints is absolutely essential in the design, development, production processes. Certainly, looking at the design process in the initial stages, when you're sitting in a room with some individuals and you're coming up blue sky, coming up with ideas, seeing what sticks. It's important that phase to actually already be considering how does this affect the larger, broader part of the population in regard to their end user experience and whatever that is, whether it's a product, an environment, or so forth. That's hypercritical, because if that starts at that early stage and goes through all the stages I'm going to talk through, you never miss a beat in being able to, or being forced to have to go backwards and apply an overlay over the top of something that's already gone further along. So certainly doing, in that initial phase of being able to talk through is very, very critical. The other sort of the next step of that is in the design phase is being able to deal with focus groups. When you get an idea that is far enough along in the process to be able to invite individuals in and talk through with focus groups about what you're looking to do, and bring those stakeholders into the conversation at that point to get feedback at a high level so that you can start making decisions that become valuable. This not only allows, again, for a better user experience at the end, but also provides some economic savings for the group organization that's doing the development or the design work in being able to make that process very efficient, again, so they don't have to backtrack. So once that process, and then maybe iterative going back and forth, once that process then goes through and you start getting engineers and you start moving into production, at that phase, again, being able to produce mock-ups, you get the engineering process to a stage where now you'll be able to create some first articles or a mock-up of a space, and then you bring, again, people in, have them interact and engage with the products. This process is, again, iterative, but it's very important in maintaining those checkpoints as you go through all the processes. This process then goes even further as you start doing the construction or actually creating your after the prototypes, you go into the first article of production if it's a product. And then you start bringing people in and getting from experts and leaders in the field. In this case, we're talking about accessibility and inclusion, and get their input from looking at plans and models that are being developed. And then as construction happens, having them go into, as a final stage, into the actual environments and work and either work or engage with whatever's being done. These are all very critical steps to maintain throughout the process. What's also great about incorporating all of those touch points is it allows a sustainability of the process. If those checkpoints are built into your process to begin with, you can't fail at the end by making sure that you've achieved an absolutely engaging, immersive, accessible, inclusive environment to the best that you can, given at the focus of the time with the technology and the strategies that are known at the time. So I think by incorporating all of that, it's really, really important to maintain that. And sort of as an overlay over all of that, I think incorporating the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, is again another really great way at those checkpoints to sort of see where you are and if you're able to incorporate those principles and practices and ideas into the methodology and the production processes. All of that, I think, when incorporated at the end of the day, will provide you with a very, very accessible and inclusive product or project.
And you will note that as every single step he went, he had, where you were engaged with the users, the people that actually, you want to use the technology or to use the smart community or cities. So let me let me ask about some fears and issues. Maya, let's go to you. Do you fear that issues with AI ethics and lack of diverse data sets could impact future efforts with smart, sustainable, and accessible and inclusive societies?
Yeah, this is something we definitely talk about at the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee with the IEEE. So the IEEE Ethical Aligned Design is just one set of these ethical principles. There's about, I don't know, probably over 50 or 60 organizations, including Google and others, writing these principles. Because one of the biggest issues that we're facing is who's coding? Do they actually include people when they're coding? And what is a code used for? There's a great film called Coded Bias by MIT, about an MIT student who was a person of color and found out that her AI couldn't even read her face. So when we're actually developing cities where certain communities are not even there in the development stage, we're facing a lot of issues. And I'm bringing this because that's an extreme case, but people are being, where we've got cameras everywhere, we've got databases of people that are misrecognized. We have all these actually safety issues that are happening because of these technologies. And even if we don't look at just AI, or even looking at the recent trials of the vaccine not being inclusive enough of people with allergies, of people of color, and then all of a sudden we're seeing that there are issues with that vaccine with certain communities, and these are life and death issues. And as we go back in time, we're seeing things like having non-gender diversity when developing things like seat belts and developing those for male with bigger bone structure versus female. I mean, there's so many of these examples of why this is so important. But when we move towards AI, and we really are, the technology train is leaving the station, but we left most of the human population behind, and only a few get to decide, get to develop, get to design it, and get to code it. I think we're facing a pretty problematic and actually scary area where we're not educating people on how to even use, how to be more media savvy. And this is in everything. This is in building cities, but also how we consume our media, when we have in America half the population not even believing reality. Like this is such a problem. So trying to get all of those factors in when we're developing, I think it's up to us, the people, and me including. Yes, I am in the business, but to actually call that out and also create environments where more voices are heard, where there is more inclusivity, where there's more diversity, even if it's not in the code, in the way we code itself, but in the interactions between the people who code and the people who are going to actually be using these technologies as the end user. And also more transparency. Marka talked about it, whether it's supply chain transparency or development transparency, or, big issue with technology and transparency is all those long agreements that we're all signing in just to use any of these applications. And nobody's going to go and read the 90-page document for every app we're using. So I think that is, going back to what Marka said, the education part, inclusivity part, but also making it easier for people to understand how to actually interact with these technologies, how to interact with these concepts, and include them in the process. One of the outreaches that we want to do with the diversity, equity, and inclusion is like really ask ourselves, who are we not speaking to, and who are we speaking for? And having that level of responsibility in people who are actually developing these technologies to have the training to bring in these conversations. And they're not easy conversations, they're extremely complex. But I think we're at the time where we live in such a complex world, and training ourselves to deal with complexity and ambiguity is important, because that is actually where diversity is. Diversity is complex. We're now in this wonderful world where we used to speak, our language used to only include certain genders, and now we have this beautiful array of new language that we're learning, and we get to actually ask people who are asking to be approached with these different pronouns what they want to be talked as, like how do they actually want to be defined? And I think that is such a great learning experience for all of us. And I think one of the things that could really help all of us as we are developing these technologies, as we're speaking to other people, is actually, yes, there's a lot of fear, but there's a lot of promise. But the promise is in the inquiry and inclusion, and not only building tables and inviting people to the tables, by going to other people's tables as well. Because I think that's the other thing. We all want to kind of bring people here to our table, but the humility is to go to other people's tables and ask, tell them what we do, but then listen. So I think technologists, all of us, myself included, learning more how to listen, learning more how to ask questions, and also using our power to change legislation, to change policy, to not let this slip, because part of the power we still have is voting and changing things and being active in our communities, in our local municipalities, in our states and countries. So I think that is part of how we change this and move from fear to hopefully more promise.
Very well said. And I think also what I'm seeing, and I've also done myself, and a lot of other people are doing, is you have to really challenge people that are not including others. So I don't, I know a lot of male allies that will not speak on panels that only have men and don't have any women, or if it's all white women and there's no diversity. And so more and more as leaders, we also have to make sure not just to say, pull up more chairs to the table, but actually to make sure that we're holding each other accountable at the same time. Marco, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to just let the audience know. After Marco, we're going to do one more round, but it's going to be more of a tight lightning round to make sure. I want to make sure all of the panelists get to do the question, and also if we have any questions from the audience. But before we go there, I want to make sure that we hear from Marco. Marco, how can we use technology to support disenfranchised communities? I know you've done some amazing award-winning work supporting homeless people with the blockchain technology, and you've talked about that a little bit, but is there more that we can do to really use technology to make sure we're supporting disenfranchised communities like the homeless or people with disabilities and others? And you're on mute. I was on mute saying you're on mute, Marco. So go off mute. There you go.
Okay. I think the panel's brought some very good points up. And one thing I'm going to say to remind everybody is this year, 2020, has been a year of fear mongering. It's probably the greatest fear year of my life that I've witnessed. And I'm sure a great deal more have witnessed that. And you can have a conspiracy theory, you can have a different theory. But the facts are that we have been bullied by governments, especially into a situation where we are afraid to leave our houses, we're afraid to talk to people. They even termed it social distancing, not physical distancing. So this is also in a language of fear. And if we, as intelligent beings, we've got to see through this, that this is a pandemic of fear as well as a virus. And I will leave everyone to make their own conclusions about that. But one thing I will say is governments should be afraid of their people. People should never be afraid of their governments. And we live in a society where I would say most people are afraid of their governments because people feel they have no choice other than to obey what they say. And it's only through a critical mass of people that we can change a government and change a policy towards helping disenfranchised communities, and also, whole communities that are not disenfranchised, but yet are disabled by the society we live in. We live in a very perverted society that really only helps the wealthy. It doesn't help people that come from poor backgrounds. Unless you have got that adversity courage that gets you through those walls. But a lot of people don't have the luxury to feel that way because they're in situations where they can't do that because they're being bullied, or they're basically in a situation where they're trafficked or something like that. So we're talking about a very big issue here. And the only way we can do that is as really with technology, is if we look at an example of Bitcoin. And the reason we're all here is because of Bitcoin. You know, I have to tell you that Bitcoin has got no founder, no office, no company, you know, and that is still around. And we all know that governments have been trying to close that down for many, many years. And now governments have been moving their attitude to saying, well, you know what, if we can't beat them, we're going to join them. And Bitcoin has been talked about in a more favorable way now, because basically, partly, it can't be shut down because it's distributed technology. Now, if you go to the average person on the street and say, listen, have you heard about Bitcoin? How many people are going to say no? How many people are going to say yes? We all know most people haven't got a clue about it. So again, this is reaching, like Maya talked about, it's a reach out campaign of an education that we have to make sure that we are reaching out to those disenfranchised communities and educating them. But we've got to do it in very simplistic ways. Right now, it's too complicated. There are too many layers to reach the right people. And disenfranchised communities are so frustrated to get the right help, to fill the right form in, as Maya said. There's forms and forms and forms. People haven't got access to Wi-Fi, and the only way you're going to get something is to fill a form in, which is, forgive my language, fucking ridiculous, okay? And that's the way we are. As you know, it's all about form filling, you know. And I'm going to also take you to the way that the average person has to live in a system where your credit profile has to be good all the time, or you cannot buy a house, you cannot buy a car, you can't borrow money. And that is extremely perverted in the way that it targets poor people, because if you lose your job, you can't pay your mortgage, you lose your credit for 6 years. That's utterly ridiculous, you know, and that's got to be changed, because we can't live in a society that condemns people for making one financial mistake. So there has to be a huge financial incentive as it includes everybody, and there has to be a social incentive. But that financial incentive has to be indelible, has to be secure. And people have to understand that the average person on the street can get a financial incentive by helping someone less fortunate than themselves. That is a society I would love to live in.
Well said, Marcos. And sadly, in the United States, family members get sick, they get cancer, something like that, and you lose everything. You lose your home, you lose everything. We got a lot of work here. So, all right. So I know we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure everybody asks a question, but also a little time at the end. We'll maybe, if you want to respond to somebody else's, you do that as well. So Yuri, I'm going to start with you again. So besides artificial intelligence and technology, what be considered to prepare developing countries for building a smart, sustainable future?
A great question. Besides technology, well, I think we need to go back to basics. Technology is great and it will be key to building a smart, sustainable future. But at the end, it's all about the decisions that we make every day. Dr. Mark Human, an international recognized physician, has said many, many times that over 80% of all chronic disease is preventable, which means that the decisions we make on what to eat and the habits that we have will define our health and future. Yet our healthcare system spends only 5% of every dollar on prevention. So I think that has to change. We should spend much more money on improving the quality of the ingredients, the process of the production of food, more education on our habits to improve our mental health, our emotional health, physical health. All of that has to be considered when we talk about technology. The good news is that artificial intelligence and technology such as the latest intelligent watches that they're launching have already some apps that are supporting preventive medicine. Of course, there is not enough access for people to have this technology, but the good news is they alert you if you have something going wrong with your heart, or they can detect high or low heart rate. They can detect if someone falls and call for help. The latest one also has something to measure the blood oxygen, which is also very important. So all of these good technology are fantastic technology improvements, but we need the government to increase as well the spending on education to create a better preventive medicine environment. So I think we still need much more focus on this area, and so that countries can really build a smart, sustainable future.
Well said, Yuri. And I know that Maya wanted to make a comment. So Maya, let me turn it over to you. She wanted to comment on some of the things you were saying, Yuri.
Yes, for sure. I mean, everything has been like really good conversation, but one of the big things about, and also Marco was talking about, we have enough. There is enough in the world, and to bring up society and having more of, beyond just sustainable, renewable, regenerative societies, we need to have kinder societies. And to actually do that is to see that everybody's basic needs are met. There's a concept of UBI, the universal basic income, but I think we need to go beyond that. I think we need UBR, universal basic resources, to see that everybody's housed, dressed, has education or basic education, access to the internet, access to electricity, access to healthy foods. And that actually brings in the conversation of we have food deserts in America, in the richest country in the world. Cities can actually transform some of their properties and land into urban farming. There can be food equity for all, or even just to a level. And also that is a much better use of our resources. It brings a sense of community. It's healthier. We're driving our food less. It comes from our neighborhoods. And it'll also beautify and bring more, especially if you're using more regenerative agriculture practices. It actually enriches the soil and draws down the CO2. So there's a lot that can be done. I think it's being brave. It's actually trying new things in cities, and also asking the city, asking the people, will you help? If people, I'm seeing it in even wonderful little plots of lands in the Mission District in San Francisco. People want to tend the land. Give people some land, create some structure around it. People are going to show up and help. You just need to ask them. I think the other biggest issue is where we're not asking people, what do you need? And how, and are you interested in coming and helping? And if we actually give people access to help, we'll see that there's enough food, enough money, enough everything, but we're not even thinking in that way. We're creating cities around cars. We're creating cities around buildings. We're not creating cities around people. And I always want to bring in the nature. We got to bring nature back into the city in a way that's healthy for the animals and the other beings that we share this planet. Being around concrete is not healthy for anybody. Having more trees, more even little urban forests is the way to move forward. It cleans the air. It brings biodiversity. It's healthier for us. It's places for us to walk around when we're told we can't see each other, and meet in parks. I think it's really one of the things we've seen through this pandemic is we've got enough. We don't need a lot. We know what's essential, and we need nature, and we need abundance of nature. So I think that transition is something that I'm really interested in pursuing in my career moving forward. Because as Marcus said, there are solutions here. We're just stuck with the haves and haves not.
I agree. I also would like to see some of these gigantic corporate buildings that are not being used now because people are teleworking being retooled to support homeless people and people in poverty. So I think they have all those beautiful campuses that you're not using. Everybody's teleworking now. Well, why don't we use that and create some really good housing? So I know that we have 10 minutes left, and I loved those comments. Maya, love the comments. So I'm going to ask Richard a question, but once again, we have 10 minutes left. So Richard, if you don't mind keeping it tight, then I can let Marco also make one more comment. And if we have a little bit more time, let Maya, also, comment. And Yuri too. So Richard, what responsibility do designers/engineers and politicians and other leaders have in taking into consideration the universal design practices and policies in a way to really make sure that we are having smart, inclusive, accessible, sustainable, smart communities?
Well, I think what's really important about the answer to this is actually, I think, in many ways incorporates a lot of the items that were that have been brought up, because there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that goes through dealing with the designers. And one of the things that designers have to think about when they're coming up with ideas and products or environments is making sure that they're engaging for the end user, and that by definition tends to be humans. And so bringing humans into the equation has to start really at that point. If you're designing something just for the sake of a product, then it doesn't help anyone. So keeping it human-centric is absolutely critical, and that starts from the original conceptual design stage, in making sure that everything being designed is for the engagement of or interacting with the human end user. Certainly from an engineering standpoint, durability, functionality, ensuring sustainability of the items that are being used, whether the components or the materials, is absolutely critical. But also in regard to what's essential for engineers is the incorporating ethical inputs and social responsibility, safety with data. A lot of these larger environments are collecting a tremendous amount of data. What's happening with the data and the safety of that and the sharing of that and so forth. Incorporating nature into environments, Maya, to the point that you were making, absolutely critical. Certainly in environments that I've always engaged in, created nature has been a very, very important component in making sure that there's plenty of that around, because it's critical at a subconscious level for us to engage as a society. Policymakers, last really fast, dealing with policymakers, it's critical for them to establish environments, political environments, and statutes and policies that allow for designers and engineers and developers and contractors to be able to work and create these environments without all the heavy overburdened restrictions that prevent that, making sure that we're dealing with things like environmental issues and that we're being good stewards with engaging with not only our global partners, but ourselves as well within our development of our communities.
Thank you. I know I'm asking y'all gigantic questions, but boy, you're doing a great job at answering them. So applause to these smart answers. Marco, let me go to you. And I know once again, I'm being the taskmaster with the time, but we have about 7 minutes left for the entire panel. So you were knighted for getting guide dogs into Malaysia and allowing them into public places, which has transformed the lives of 350,000 blind people. Why is it important for leaders to help transform lives of others so that we can all give back to society?
Yeah, okay. I think it's an incredible thing when you think about, I'm only one person. I made a 10-minute film. It cost me $30,000 of my own money, and it changed 250,000 people's lives within 10 days. We made the film. We called it Are You Blind? We brought in a guide dog from China. We filmed this person going into public places, being turned away on gunpoint at certain shopping malls. We got it on camera, and we released it on Facebook and YouTube. We got 13 million hits in 7 days. The Malaysian government telephoned me. The King of Malaysia contacted me, said, Marco, we don't know whether to knight you or eliminate you because you've embarrassed us. And what I want to tell everyone on this meeting and everyone watching this is film, as Richard will tell you, film makes the most difference of any medium there is on this planet, because it's got one thing, it's called visibility. The other example is David Attenborough's work showing how the plastics have damaged the oceans. Now, if it wasn't for that film, plastics would still be used pandemically and destroying people's lives. So those are two films which make a huge difference. So it's what we can do as individuals by making a film and having the courage to do it. So when I'm looking at a society, I'm looking, right, what can I do here that's going to make a huge difference? That's going to be a legacy for the country, but also a legacy for me, because I need to be fulfilled doing it as well. There has to be a two-way benefit, guys, right? And if you can do that, an ex-homeless person can do that, imagine what we all could do. I'm going to quote Thomas Edison's famous quotation. If we all did what we were capable of doing, we would astound ourselves. And that's how I want to leave that.
Beautiful, beautiful words. So now we have 4 minutes left, and let me just, Yuri, let me just give you the floor. Do you want to make any final comments, and then we can just pass it around real quick?
No, I 100% agree. I like the comment that Marco just said about the potential that we have through the internet and film. We also are leading here in Mexico and Latin America a movement in which we are sharing a lot of information resources for many different groups. This year we were surprised by the amount of elderly people who joined, and as I said, they were quite lost, but they somehow. And well, that I will just agree with that point, and that's my final remark is that it's on us to make a difference. We have the tools. It's about finding the way to do it. And a fantastic example by Mark as well.
Yes, and we love the work that you're doing. So I hope everybody really checks out what Yuri's doing because it's very impressive. So Maya, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, thank you, Marco, for your work and Yuri as well. Really, it's about, I think one of the big things, and back to your question on leadership, for some reason in the past, well, maybe it's a human past, we look at leaders as somebody that found himself at the top without questioning why they got there. And I think we need to flip it over and look at role models who we want to be aspire to be, and hopefully being kinder and more humanistic humans, and really elevating those voices. And I'm seeing more and more groups elevating voices of people who definitely care. And this younger generation, like Gen Z, yes, I'm going to bring Greta up, but there's others like Greta. There are so many Gretas out there doing amazing work for the planet, for young scientists. So elevating these voices, young and old, of all ages and of all diversities of people who are fighting for a better planet, and making those the rock stars and the reality show stars, not the very emptied out, hollowed leaders that we're seeing on the television. So I think for me, it's like that is why leaders need to actually lead as by example of what to do, not what not to do. So that's what I'm aspiring for all of us to become better leaders, better elders, and better ancestors, because we're living what we do. Every choice we take right now is impacting future generations on this planet.
Well said, well said. And we have 1 minute left. And so Richard, let me turn that over to you.
Well, thank you. Certainly, I think one of the interesting things, and it's sort of it's been brought up a number of different times, is apprenticeship and mentorship and leadership. What's really critical about that is I think systemically one of the larger global issues that we've seen with all the problems that are happening has to do with the fact that we have a particular generation that has not incorporated young or mentorship or apprenticeships behind them. And so what's happened is they've grown accustomed and sort of power hungry with where their positions are and refuse to let go. And it's this sort of piling on without incorporating new young ideas into the system that allows stagnation. And of course, we all know what happens with stagnation. You end up with just a foul pond at the end of the day. And that's sort of where we are without the influx of bringing in new people, young people, new thoughts, new ideas. This is sort of where we are, and we're all falling victim of that. I think it's very, very important that we embrace the youth, embrace their ideas of change, because that is what allows development, innovation, progress, advancements of societies and cultures.
Thank you, Richard. And luckily, Serafina said we have a few more minutes, so I could actually let Marcos make last comments, and then if anyone else would like to comment. But I was very, very impressed with this panel, and also very impressed with what you all said. But as we were all been saying, it's going to take all of us to do this. We're going to have to support each other. We're going to have to support the younger generation. I'm with Maya. I'm an elder, and I believe it's part of my responsibility to make sure the younger generation is being listened to and heard. When I was a younger woman, I was told, you're too young, be quiet, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. the young people aren't going to put up with that anymore, because they know this is their world, and that they want to have a say in it. So Marco, let me give you the final words.
Hello. Yeah, I'm with Maya on this. I think I wouldn't label myself as an elder because I'm so young inside and young at heart. For me personally, I think we have to speak the same language as different generations, especially Generation Z, who are discounted immensely in society. Now, I've got a friend who's my niece. Sorry, she's my friend's daughter, and she's 17, and she's a huge YouTuber. She started in YouTube about a year ago, and she's got millions of fans. And I went to a shopping mall with her, and all of her fans started approaching her. And I was so curious, what was so magnetic about this girl? And I interviewed one of the people that was speaking to Chloe. She said, she just speaks our language. She just understands us. And I thought that was a very powerful statement from someone that I learned from. Because if we can talk people's language, and we can seek, as the great Stephen Covey said, if we can seek first to understand, then to be understood, communication, I believe, is the greatest part of our society that we need to really work on. Once we bridge that communication gap, I believe we can have disabled people. I mean, look on the TV today in England, there were 90-year-old people getting a vaccine, and the first time they'd had their voice heard, but they sounded like they were 25, you know? These are so, and the thing about people who are older is they have more time to help. They don't work, they're retired. So there was a book I read years ago where I think it was to do with, I'll think of the Conversations with God. I don't know if anyone's ever read that trilogy.
I have.
I was reading that. Yeah, I was reading that. Neil Donald Walsh.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Yep, I love that work.
And he said he had a conversation with God one day, and he said, "Why don't you let the older people look after the children, because they've got all the time? So then the parents have all this less stress, you know, carpooling and football pooling and God knows what, and then we can do much more in society, and then older people can feel they're making more of a difference." Because how many people love their grandchildren? You know, so this is just a thinking out loud kind of thing that we should really look at as leaders, but also we really have to include everyone. And to do that, we really have to bash through this government red tape bullshit that is stopping the things that we really want to do, getting to the people that really need it. And we've got to do a lot more campaigning for that in big numbers, really big numbers. And I want to thank Dennis Garda, who's a great friend of mine, he's actually led this conference from the start. Denise is the hardest working person I have ever met. He's an incredible guy, an incredible human being.
I agree. We're all blessed. We're all blessed by Dennis.
Totally.
Thank you, Dennis.
An incredible humanist who cares for everybody like I've never seen. But his work ethic is off the charts. Off the charts. And without Denise, we wouldn't be here talking to each other and having a fantastic time, but also giving really great content. And now I've made 4 more friends, that I'd never had before because of this initiative by Denise, which I think we should all thank him from the bottom of our hearts and our souls for getting this off the ground, because it takes a shitload of work, really. Forgive my profanity, but sometimes it's a shortcut of saying what I really want to say. So I think this is a great platform to really move to bigger places, to more decentralized places, more technological places where everyone feels included, and to build platforms where everyone can take part, but is also incentivized financially and socially.
Well, and we also need to make sure that we've subscribed to their YouTube channel, and that we're using that hashtag, and that we're commenting on the other panels, because that's another way we can show Dennis love, is by really getting behind him and making sure that we are heavily engaged in these conversations. And I saw Yuri.
Why don't we get like teenagers on this panel next time? Let's have a teenager conference and get them mixing with us and talking about what they see as their language. I think that would be really cool as an idea.
I agree. And Yuri, you're holding up one of those cool hearts there. So
Yeah, I want to send a big award to Dennis because of all the fantastic work. These are the wellness awards that we give in Latin America. We want to extend this big award because he's making a huge difference with this event. And as Debra said, everyone has to subscribe now to this channel because it's a way we can make this movement bigger.
Well, I'm humbled, and thank you so much. It's a teamwork. We have as well Hilton, Supra, and Serafima, and all of you. It was a wonderful and inspiring session. Actually, all the sessions, but yours was a great way to finish with a very beautiful symphony of inspiration. Thank you, Debra, for being the leader of this panel, and as well your fantastic leadership. And actually, I want to dedicate this because this panel is about inclusion. So, Mark, you mentioned about my hard work capacity. Actually, it came from my father, and my father is the person that is disabled mostly since he was a child. So I got this capacity of work from him, and he actually never complained. I never saw him complain, and he has a leg smaller than other. Part of his back is destroyed, and is still working and still pushing things. And I think these ethics of work that you mentioned in the panel, both the ethics, but as well the capacity to put things forward, because sometimes speaking is not enough. So yeah, I'm inspired, and thank you so much for making this. And I think all of you, I think this is the sum of our parts, and actually people all over the world as well. That is the idea of this. And actually, Marco, I took notes. Next time we'll have for sure a teenager or two. So I have them around the house, but I'll make sure that they are present. And as well, I tried, Debra, for this panel, actually, Antonio positioned to get us someone with the language sign.
Right.
But it didn't got it on time. But actually, with StreamYard, it's possible to get it. So for the future, is in my list. And I have already some people, but we're going to do it again probably in March, April, and you will be invited again, but we'll hopefully with a different capacity and as well. I want to share some numbers, and please stay because this is as well a way of celebrating. You cannot be face to face, but you can share. So our numbers actually are astonishing, and of course I was not expecting these numbers. So we got 50,000 people yesterday and today in terms of direct access. And over 2 million people in the last month are actually part of all the work that we did, but both in the real numbers that can be measured, and as well, of course, for now we paid for all of this, but we're very excited that in the future we might get some other sponsors that could allow us to as well push some of the panels, and as well, for instance, Debra, you were doing a fantastic work on the areas of inclusion that of course we are part of Business Cloud, the Cities ABC platform that we actually I want to announce probably in terms of a focus that we're going to be doing, and as well, of course, we have been working with Marco to support the Freedom X project that is baby to create a solution app in blockchain for people with homeless. But I think definitely both the platform Open Business Council and Cities ABC are precisely created to be what you discussed here. But of course, it's not easy because coming up with a strategy that can make both the technology and the people, it's the key thing. And I think especially your inspiration and as well all the projects you're doing are amazing. So I think hopefully we can actually do more and as well help each other, because this is a global like you mentioned something very important that it stayed in my mind, is that at the moment we have a massive challenge in the society, is that we have people living a parallel reality. I put it very well, but it's a big thing. And thinking in the United States, which is a country I love, and especially that what is happening is quite scary, because it was partly because of the technology manipulation and all the conspiracy theories. And I think take that, it's a big thing. And I think we can use this for inspiring people, like Marco said, to create, for instance, what Marco did in Malaysia. It's massive, because before that, probably Marco would go to jail. But because of social media, he managed actually to convert something that was amazing. And I think that's what we need to do, use it for, I think, something more interesting that can actually help us all. So I'm speechless. It's wonderful to have you here. And let's make this a bigger community, our community, all of us, because it's not mine, it's not Hilton or Serafima, it's from all of us. And of course, a big responsibility as well.
And Dennis, we want to help you bring sponsors too. So thank you for your work, for Serafina, for Hilton. So, you know, let us, I know that we're partners, but we want to make sure some of our clients are sponsoring what you're doing too. It's very powerful. And I want to win one of the hearts. I want to win one of Yuri's hearts. So we'll I love that.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. Isn't it beautiful?
No, actually, I've been telling Uriel that he needs to do this festival worldwide. We might do it because it's about No, I think Debra, for sure. I think for Cities ABC, I wanted to be one of the leaders because the Cities ABC is just as a global announcement, and we have as well with us Antonio. Actually, he was supposed to be speaking, but is Portuguese. We need to find a way of pushing his English. He's in Brazil, so Antonio is bringing us a couple of cities in Brazil. So you're going to have a big audience for the platform for Cities ABC because there's 20 million people alone in Brazil with disabilities, and we have already all the interest. They wanted to come in, but we have to build the technology first. But there's a big, and I think like Marcus said, the numbers of homelessness is astonishing because if you put 1.3 billion people disabled plus 1.2, you mentioned Marco, homelessness, we're talking about 50% of the planet, and these numbers are not reflected in the global stats. So, and I think a lot more can be done. So, but yeah, one day at a time.
But success today. Woohoo!
Oh, no, thank you so much. It's ours. Our success is yours, and I think it's great. It was very inspiring. I don't know, Wilton, if you want to say something, or Serafima, or anyone else, because this is as well, I think, a great wrap up. I'm very happy. And we still have around 100 people around the world listening to us, so they're still persistent, so I appreciate that. You are on mute. That's a new.
I know. So easy to forget that.
Been a huge experience for me. It really has been a huge experience for me. I've done a lot of work in the past, working in doing conferences and things like that, but this one has been very, very special. It really, really has. At the end of the day, the key takeaways that we've had from all the contributors to this brilliant event. I just went through the list. I was just astonished. Over 100 speakers and organizations involved in all the panels that we had. And we had the Minister of State for Science and Technology from Japan. We had Kimiko representing, Tran Van Tung, the Deputy Minister of Science and Tech in Vietnam. And then we had, Alexandra Borinikov from Ukraine, with very, very interesting efforts in terms of completely digitizing the whole bureaucracy in their country. And of course, the great work that Eric's been doing. I mean, Eric was, working, on the UK Smart Nation and previously worked with the UK government and Prime Minister Cameron. And then you've got Michael Stanley Jones, who's, working with the United Nations and bringing the digitization projects that he's bringing to the whole thing. And of course, the whole, a lot of work from Kieran Fernandez, the professor who's the Associate Dean of Durham University, in terms of framing policy and trying to bridge the gap between policy and reality. And, we had, even the Minister of IT and Telecoms from the government of Pakistan. I mean, this is huge. And then Jane Chan, who's, from the government of Hong Kong, SL, on the whole, all those sort of startup initiatives. And then we had, of course, Bangladesh. We had, what's her name? Jameen. I mean, she was amazing, talking with the minister this morning in terms of the efforts that she's doing with Bangladesh and Startup Bangladesh. I mean, that was very, very impressive, the work they're doing, and the contributions from Edward Dinder on Huawei and the work that they've been doing. Of course, we've touched upon all the technologies. We've touched upon 5G. We've touched on IoT. Infrastructure is very, very, very important. And then the misunderstanding about infrastructure, that was highlighted in what we were doing. And then, of course, we had some contributions from MDEC in Malaysia, and some fantastic stuff that was talked about in terms of the supply chain from Rona Morel, who's working with ARC 2030 and the Princesses Trust. And then, of course, a great contribution from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry for Slovakia from Monika Koceviga. And then and then we had Max Lautenschläger who's from Iconic, and a lot of the work that he's doing in terms of digital assets. And then, and also the digital platform that's been put together by Rob Wells. And then, of course, Professor Lisa Short and her contribution. And then I think the one that I really liked was Aidan Meller and Ben Gorsel, the two men at the forefront of, the two people at the forefront of robotics. Aidan Meller with Ada the robot, who's using a robot actually based on the creative side of the development of robotics, and then Ben Gorsel with Singularity's Net's development of Sophie the robot, and of course the latest robot, which is the health and wellness like nurse, I would say. And then of course the contribution from Dr. Jamal Onish, who's from the University of Edinburgh, and way in which data can be analyzed and used, and an ethical way of using data. And Mark Buckley, who's been working on the United Nations Sustainable Goals in terms of how society today needs to evolve forward, particularly on the education spectrum. I mean, education was one of the key takeaways, is education, but education not in a linear fashion, and education across all of society, all age groups, all demographics. And then, of course, in the final session that we had this evening from, the team, I mean, just, thank you very much, Maya. Thank you very much, Marco. Thank you very much, everybody, for your contribution. I really, really am delighted to have been part of this, and thank you very much.
No, and I think I want as well to thank you all our team behind the cameras. So there's Rachel, Sylvia, Marco, Arnaldo. They've been working 24/7 all on this. They are joining us actually from all over the world, and as well people we had in Vietnam, Leon, An as well. They're in Vietnam right now. Is midnight or something like that, but they've been as well working a lot in Guyana. So we have a quite global team. So we have people in London, Spain, and then Vietnam and Kuala Lumpur. So, and hopefully around the world. So you're all part of us, and I hope, so Debra, like you mentioned, I'm particularly interested to collaborate, and I think your thought leadership is something that touched me a lot because of your work, and actually your personal background you didn't mention, but you have a very hardcore personal background in your family, which most of the people probably would be desperate, but you are inspiring the world and unstoppable. So that's wonderful. I think the story of Debra, I urge everyone to listen to her interview because it's not just inspiring, but as well very touching. So I think there's a lot of stories like this, like you mentioned, Marco. I think your story as well, your personal story, because you as a child, we were on the streets with your mother. So that's kind of something that marks someone for life. But you've been making that your strength and your energy in film, in technology, and in charity work. And Richard, of course, you work with one of the biggest corporations in the planet, but now working as well what you do. And Maya, I think your work in thought leadership is more important than ever, because I think we need that. And as well, very sharp focus on this. And of course, Uriel, wellness is key. I know it for a long time, but I think it's a key area. So, and of course, I think one of the things I took as my personal notes is there's a lot of details in terms of putting things in practice, especially when it comes to technology. Hilton mentioned the panel yesterday with, of course, there was with two leading people making robots and androids. And actually, I've been actually exchanging with both the robots, and it's really, this is happening. Okay, it's not in 5 years, and most of you know that we are talking. But for instance, when I start speaking with either robot, last time I was in their studio, at a certain point, I start talking like a normal person. Initially, I was a bit skeptical, but I was literally talking for 10 minutes, and he was interacting with me completely like a human. Okay, so this is not in 5 years. Okay, and thanks God, this is a robot created by a personal that is an historic person of art, or an art dealer and art history expert, and the 3 leading universities. But if this can be done by someone with not a huge amount of money, with 3 major universities, for instance, today, this is in the news, mainstream news, the French government put official a new law of ethics to create bionic soldiers. Okay.
Oh,
so This is
Wow.
official in the news.
That's not good. Oh, wow.
On the news, and this is France, so it's public. Okay, so this is not. I think everything we're talking in this event is not future; is very present, and of course the concerns that come out of this, and especially what is going to happen in the next 5 years, is very powerful. But I think we wrap up this. I don't know if there's any final word.
I just want to say one thing. Thanks to technology, I'm able to reach out. I reached out to Maya some time ago, and Maya and I met years ago in Earl's Court in London. Serafima I've been working with for these last few years. Serafima and I have never ever met, except digitally. And we have an incredibly close working relationship. I've met Dennis a few times. Hinaldo I met once, and Hinaldo actually lives across the Bay of Algeciras here from me. He's literally straight to the crow flies. He's 5 kilometers away, but we can't meet because of COVID. But we work together, and this is the power of technology. I'm sitting here at the age of 60 years old, and I'm all inspired by the technology. And I take something out of your book, Marco. We will bring the youth into this platform. We really need to engage with them because we need to hear their voice, and it's really, really powerful. And thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I'm very grateful for everyone for joining our conference, for agreeing to speak, to share your ideas, to bring in such an amazing contribution to all of us. It's been really a big learning curve from business point and from learning about views and technologies. Very, very inspiring. Grateful to our team, as Denis mentioned. We all pulled together and done really well. And what I personally liked about our conference is that we managed to cover the aspect of frontier and technology, and from different angles, from government angles and digital strategies, going more into tech with more technical panels about cybersecurity or coding. And the highlight of this was this last panel that spoke about the most important things, I would say, about us as humans and how can we use that technology to benefit for the humanity. So it was a wonderful 2 days event, and I'm very much looking forward to our next event when we all gather together and create more beautiful things. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Serafima.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful words. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
See you all in March, April.
Bye-bye. Adios.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Bye-bye. A pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's it.